Former U.S. Army infantry captain Charles Sheffel once explained in his memoir, Crack and Thump, as we got closer to the front and the possibility of dying became real, more men turned to religion. It was comforting to stand in a group of GIs and recite the Lord's Prayer together. That's when my soldiers looked most like what they were, a bunch of young kids. The chaplain proved an important part of maintaining morale among men who become so aware of their own mortality during the most destructive war in human history. The U.S. Army, from its initial roots in the Revolutionary War, had incorporated chaplains into its ranks at the urging of George Washington. Since that time, the chaplain had become a part of the Army and its organization. However, the need for chaplains had never been so dire until World War I. With the Army expanding at an never-before-seen rate along the lines of a modern European Army, the Chaplain Corps was ill-equipped to provide the professional chaplains needed. During the Second World War, that dire shortage could be applied to just about everything the U.S. Army needed. The Chaplain Corps was very much a mirror of the contemporary culture in America. During the interwar period between World War I and World War II, recruitment never met the quota set per denomination for either active duty or reserve chaplains. The chaplain force was small, and often perhaps an overreaction to the haste and near fanatical religious fervor established during the First World War. Most churches have proposed further military involvement. In fact, the growing acceptance of secular humanism amongst both laymen and clergy alike meant that there was often an underappreciation or even an outright denial of the inherent sin nature of men. Until Pearl Harbor, however, chaplains were still very hard to come by in the U.S. military. Very few were volunteering for service, as they could not be drafted to meet the needs of the Army. However, after Pearl Harbor, recruitment levels were able to be reached to where the Army could hopefully assign a chaplain for 30,000 men. The chaplains were assigned a whole range of duties, ranging from combat troops to aviation and rear echelon units, both stateside and overseas. Most of them ended up on being trained at new chaplain schools that were activated during the war. The previous one at Fort Leavenworth had been closed down in the interwar period, so few chaplains had been recruited that the Army even established one at Harvard University. Training included casualty recovery, land navigation, cemetery planning. These chaplains were expected to act like professional officers and to be knowledgeable about military courtesy. Some of us who were taking History 530 earlier this semester will remember reading about the term sky pilot being used to describe chaplains and pastors working amongst the logging camps in Minnesota. However, that term was usually used during World War II to apply to chaplains assigned to the Army Air Force or to parachute infantry or parachute qualified units. These chaplains took the full month-long course, very rigorous training, and became jump qualified. Many chaplains had to make do under less than ideal circumstances. For instance, one Southern Baptist chaplain was forced to use actual wine in place of grape juice for one of his services. As one witness stated, the looks on their faces was one of astonishment when that hot wine hit their lips. When the time came for chaplains to rotate home, like many of the men they served with, they found the idea of returning to civilian life daunting. One man, writing about his time as a chaplain with the U.S. Army Air Force in the Pacific, stated, "I tried to remember my home, but the harder I tried, the more hazy it all became. Home seems to get far away from you after a year in combat. Methodically, I tried to figure out how I would get to my house from the railroad station in Abilene. I was puzzled when I found I couldn't remember. I felt as if I had been here all my life." During the Second World War, the chaplain largely reflected the era he lived in. After the war started, however, the Army was largely able to acquire the chaplains it needed, given the number of men that eventually joined the ranks. It was a thankless job, especially when chaplains clashed with the men and the officers over moral issues. Their impact was very hard to definitely quantify, merely due to the mental and spiritual nature of their work. However, the U.S. Army chaplain during World War II did his part, encouraging the troops at a time when they were most aware of their mortality.